Ben Nichols, great to have you on the show. You and I have, of course, met much over paddle. We even had the chance to share a beer down in Madrid at the Hexagon Cup. As I like to start my podcast, who is Ben Nichols?
Good morning. Hi, Minter. Good to see you, and thank you firstly for having me on. Who's Ben Nichols? I like to think people are not necessarily symmetrically kind of put in a box, and I think my career from a business point of view, I've had I like to think an interesting career and quite diverse in terms of the experiences. So I'd like to think I'm not a one trick pony, as we say in the UK, and fairly agile individual. Who am I? I am a positive, fairly outgoing individual that likes to see the glass half full with kind of personal life and professional life. Likes to try and see the best in people, and likes to get along with people and try and make the best out of this life that we have through the kind of unexpected twists and turns. So I'd say I'm quite a philosophical person as well. And Yeah, try not to complain and grumble too much about life. It's challenging for everyone to different degrees and at different times, but it's what you make of these situations in life. Again, you're kind of away from the desk and at the desk. So that's kind of a mentality.
So you said it's philosophical. Do you have any specific types of philosophies, or is it more like glass half full optimism?
No, I realize I've set myself up for that question. No, look, none on the theoretical side. I suppose I'm more kind of the glass half full, which is the cliche, but yeah, just sort of having an outlook on life and having perspective, as we all like to be able to have. But there are times when you lose that perspective and you get in the weeds on things. But I like to think I'm able to step back, see the big picture, use the experiences I've had living and working in different countries to always realize things are not as bad as they seem. Things are, when you take the bird's eye view of things, I think you can quickly realize that actually life is pretty good, and there's always a way out of things, around things, through things, and a way to wake up the next day with a fresh slate. So yeah, I think just having that view on life, no matter how hard things get or how much you get tunnel vision with things as well. It's always about stepping back and looking from an outsider's point of view wherever possible.
Taking perspective,
Perspective.
a lovely thing to have. You were talking about multiple activities and skills and industries and things you've done. I typically refer to that as the cone,
Yeah.
where as opposed to the T. The T has one singular strong suit, like an expert in biochemistry in that typical field within biochemistry. And then you have the pie shape where you have two branches and you have two strengths. But you and I are more like the comb, where we have lots of little teeth in our comb, all representing different things we've done in our lives. And hopefully the comb as a whole will get our hair straight all the same.
Yes, exactly. I like that way of thinking. I think I definitely take the outlook on life that I've always been someone that, well, I think look increasingly, I've become someone that likes a challenge, almost to the extent of testing myself when there's an easy path to maybe just having a 9 to 5 job, or taking an easy path. I sort of want to test myself and want to prove I can do things. I wouldn't say I've always had that as a youngster, but I think having in the working world when I became an adult, having challenges of not being in the right jobs or getting made redundant or not getting jobs I think I probably should have got, and feeling a bit, at the time, hard, kind of resentful or hard done by, actually. I've always sort of, I think, been quite tenacious and thought actually there'll be another door that opens if I find it. And if I take examples of going into the World Anti-Doping Agency, which we might speak to. I had no background in medicine, science, law, all the different elements that the Global Anti-Doping Agency had experts in. But I had a background in sports and I had a background in media relations, and I had to learn hard and fast about the technical world of anti-doping. But I took on that role because I had an opportunity, and the easy route would have been, I'm not ready for this. But you're given an opportunity, and I thought, it's within my capability to find a way to get up to speed, improve myself, and prove that to others I can do a job. So I think that was, that job in particular, I was able to find resilience, and it was a very tough role during a period of time, which was the Russian doping scandal, so fraught with all sorts of complexities. And it was I was able to learn a lot myself and find inner strength to do a really tough job. So that reason I mentioned that kind of, I feel, shaped me professionally and personally to take on challenges and to prove you're at your best when you're outside your comfort zone. And that's
Mm.
something, even with paddle, setting up my own paddle company, that's something it's not, some people say, wow, good for you, as in, why I wouldn't do that. But I have, and I run with it.
So it makes me think of the tension between imposter syndrome and bravado.
Yeah,
Bravado being, yeah, I can do that. I've never done it before, but I can do it.
yeah,
And imposter syndrome, I've done it 15 times, but I still don't think I'm good enough for it.
yeah.
How do you manage that disequilibrium or tension?
It's a good point. I think I'd like to think the imposter syndrome lessens over the years because you've proven yourself more and more. There's more proof points, let's say, to that you can do things which are outside that comfort zone. But there'll always be things you're uncomfortable with. So, I think maybe it builds more confidence that you can encounter things which are not in your lane. Um, yeah, perhaps there is a slight imbalance there. Yeah, a little bit of bravado, and I definitely think I sort of have taken from my parents, as we all do, that kind of skill set of yes, you can do it, and go on. Better to give it an effort and try and succeed than not to have a go. But at the same time, yes, there's that fear of am I going to be going a step too far with this? We're only human. Can we take on more projects, more difficult challenges? Yeah, more learnings. But I think you don't want to always stretch yourself. You want to, you need to be working within your kind of your what's reasonable. But I think actually I do enjoy that challenge and not getting too comfortable, because I think it kind of builds resilience and builds strength and helps that confidence. And I've always been someone to want to build confidence through actions, and I think that's something I thrive on, and I've proven to myself. I say this with as much humility as I can. I've proven to myself to be able to do things which, of course, I had doubts at the beginning. Could I do that? And then I'll give you one example, Minty. When I went to the World Anti-Doping Agency, I got that role aged, I want to say aged, what was I, 29, 30. And I thought, am I too early for this? It was a really senior role. I thought this is great in 5 years, but then you don't choose the timings of these things. Someone obviously saw the ability of me to come in and do a role which was acting as spokesperson for them, and a very complex technical legal issue with all the doping scandals that followed. And one of the skills I had to do was go up and do public speaking, managing press conferences, being
Under fire.
under immense pressure, under a very technical issue where journalists are trying to catch you out because you're the global authority, and that becomes a story if you've not got the message right. Um, and yeah, alongside the chair and the CEO of the company, who years in the bank at doing this, and who are the front faces of the organization, and you're there as an extra spokesperson from the media point of view. But yeah, I had pretty much zero public speaking experience at the time. And as a kid, I was shy until I'd say kind of mid to late teens. And I had to go and do that public speaking. That was part of my role, and it was sink or swim, and I did it. And you know what? One comment, someone said, "Oh, you're really good at that," and I thought, "God, am I really?" I said, "I hated that." And then I had to do it again. There was no way I had to do it again a few weeks later at a WADA press conference. And then, lo and behold, a few people say, "Oh, you're a natural at this." And you think, well, they're not just saying it to be kind. Maybe one person does, but I think there's maybe a trend, and you think, well, actually, I can do this. So it builds that confidence. And
Mm.
that was a case of, actually, then I thought, right, I can nurture this skill, and that's something I've got to do in my role. So let's embrace it. So I think, yeah, embracing opportunities and is something I try and do.
Yeah, leaning into the challenge, because
Yes.
I think that a lot of people shy away from challenges, not just because it's change, but
Yeah.
because of risk of failure. And then once you've brushed close to failure or even failed,
Mm.
it sharpens your, well, hopefully your desire to continue on, fight through it. Of course, if you back down, well, then that's another story. But this notion of leaning into the challenge, leaning into the discomfort, I think is something that's a tremendous skill, or at least attitude to have. And I would welcome others to take it on. I think we need more action. We need the ability to face challenges, because we are surely going to have many more. But going back to this WADA experience, I mean, naturally, I've been close to sports all my life, like you, Ben, and
Mm.
I even worked with the AIBA for boxing. And so doping isn't only the domain of Russia. It's
It's not.
the effects of that decision continue to impact, of course, professional Russian athletes. I just had Ksenia Sharifova on
Mm.
my paddle podcast, who has to represent a blank flag, amongst others. But you must have learned the inside, and of course now your media training is going to kick in.
Mm.
There's not just Russia.
No.
From my, and if I'll tell you the story. I have several stories of
Yeah.
supreme athletes. I mean, Olympians, gold medalists, who are known for running out the back door when the um, whatever urine test people came in the front door. I have an example of another tennis athlete who was paid off by Nike
Mm.
because he got busted.
Yeah.
Not going to name names, but it would appear that doping is such a almost intrinsic to sports. And how do you view it from having been on the inside?
It's a really good point. I went into WADA probably as naive as any 30-year-old would be, having read my books. And this is just at the tail end of this is just after the US Anti-Doping Agency had released their Armstrong report, and Lance was on Oprah, and the mea culpa, etc. And that, so I thought when I went in, it's not going to get any juicier than this, with media issues to have to contend with from a, and lo and behold, it then became a country, and Russia at that. So look, I went in as naive as any 30-year-old, having read my books and studied up, thinking, from an idealistic point of view, the goodies and the baddies, which is how it's often been positioned in the media. Far more complex than that. Far more complex. There's inadvertent dopers. There's people who dope and then really go on the aggressive in the attack, as we know, and double down on it and do it systemically. And there's all sorts of different degrees of it. Yet there are the rules, and there's got to be lines drawn somewhere. So I think there's different, there's the WADA rules, and then there's the ethics behind it, and that's where you've got the grey areas of people saying, oh, well, they were within the rules, but should they have been taking X or Y? So I think you learn being at WADA. There's the sort of ethical argument behind it. You also learn that you're towing the line of what are the rules, being informative and being factual with everything you're providing. And what's it like on the inside? It's look, it's a big organization. Well, it's a smaller organization than people expected at that time. I think we're around 70 people, with an office in headquarters in Montreal, Canada, and a smaller office in Lausanne in Switzerland. And people were thinking we were this great, sort of gargantuan organization, the IOC type level, and we were not. We were punching above our weight, and yet we came under for heavy scrutiny, as we should, but heavy pressure on the Russia issue and sanctions. And I think a lot of people expected the world of WADA as this sort of magic wand of eradicating doping. That's never going to happen. We're there to try and we were there to try and reduce it, and to also be proactive about educating people on why that's the wrong choice, why we think the bulk of people don't agree with this as an ethical or health issue for athletes. And it was sensitive with issues. You've got differing opinions. Obviously, you've got the legal argument. You've got the sort of sporting arguments. You've got commercial side of sport, people around the Olympic Games wanting to ensure all are competing and everything is positive and happy and clean. And then you've got those on the kind of more kind of seeing WADA as a police force of the world, putting down the heavy fist of sanctioning. So you had different, and that's where kind of, without going into the weeds in it, the Russia issue really brought to light the anti-doping system and its weaknesses and its opportunities to improve, as kind of where you had those on the taking the hardline approach with a country like Russia, and those about individual responsibility and who's culpable, etc. And I think that really played out publicly as to which side people fell on. But I think, coming back to your earlier point, yeah, really important to realize, no, Russia was not alone in terms of, being the only doping sort of country out there. There have been others where it's been kind of alleged or investigated different kind of levels of doping issues. They were the country that was had a big report brought out and had significant sanctions. But there's individual athletes out there who've obviously doped, and there's in different sports where it's been systemic, like cycling. So there's no, I think you just, at WADA, what you're doing is looking at each case as that, avoiding the outside, kind of ignoring the outside noise, and looking at each case on its, on the legal merits. And Russia was a situation we hadn't seen before in terms of, obviously everything that went on around the Olympics and everything that came out. But then you've got, individual cases, and you've got situations in different sports. So I think that you just have to kind of almost block out the noise and look at each individually for the situation that it is, and not try and draw comparisons of, is Russia similar to what other countries have done, or are other countries at it? People will always speculate, and we can only, as an organization at WADA, go on the information that's out there, and that's been found, and that's how you have to kind of look at it. So it's quite long answer to your question. It's quite pragmatic, quite technical. At the same time, me and my department, we were this kind of gateway between the noise and the speculation and the sort of controversial side that the media push, and this organization, which was quite bureaucratic and quite regulatory, and just trying to enforce rules that were in a world anti-doping code. So we're trying to bridge that gap between public interest and appetite for this juicy sporting story, and the practical need to I suppose just protect athletes' rights and ensure everything was communicated officially and factually and without conjecture.
Well, for me on the outside, it does look a lot like you're swimming upstream.
Yeah.
It's just a friend of mine used to run ATP rules and regs and anti-doping, and he talked to me about how really the top 100 ATP players, or presumably WTA, but he was talking about the men's, are able to afford to have what it takes to get around the doping testing techniques. And so they carried around. I mean, he laughed about how some of them would carry around spare urine samples, and that how do you do that? And it's an expensive habit to do, and you need to have a whole sort of system to figure that out if that's your route. And at the same time, it feels like if you don't try to carry out anti-doping, you are taking away from the credibility of the sport, or at least maybe another piece of it, which is sports is supposed to entertain and inspire. And if the inspiration is, well, you need to take drugs to have these huge, ridiculous biceps or whatever, that's not a very healthy message.
Yeah, and this was the people often use that line, who can afford the most expensive, unethical doctor out there to help them win this sort of arms race. Look, I think absolutely, it came down to people see doping in a different ways. People see it kind of very much from the ethical point of view, what's right to take, what's not. Should they be taking that as an athlete if they don't have if they're prescribed or don't have a condition? Does it enhance their performance? Is it against this notion of the spirit of sport, like you alluded to? And then something that often gets forgotten, the health argument. A lot of these substances are very unhealthy, especially taken in the quantities that cheats do take them, and it's sort of dangerous. It's a danger issue. So there's all these issues to weigh up, and obviously that's what the powers that be at WADA and the anti-doping authorities will decide before putting something on the list or not. And obviously some substances have been on the list and removed, and some remain legal and then get put on the list because new evidence comes forward about their performance enhancing qualities or danger to health. So it's always it's an evolving issue. You know, it's never done. It's never going to be completely contained. But it, you know, I always came down to when I was working there of people saying, "Oh, you'll never win this." It's a very kind of simplistic way of looking at it, and it's, well, you know, if WADA wasn't there, would people be happy? What sort of message would that send? Would the athletes be happy? And I think that's what we came down to was who are our kind of constituents here. And we're doing our best to back the corner of the overwhelming majority of athletes who wanted someone to at least try and keep sport clean. And that's, you know, that's what WADA and the authorities are there for.
At the very least, to keep the sport competitive, because
Exactly.
if it's unbalanced, and it reminds me of what just happened in the professional paddle tour, where the men went and boycotted 2 tournaments in reaction to, or at least in an effort to get more balanced for the lower seeded people who can't afford to have an entire team. So, and then the schedule was always managed around the top players. And so I thought at the end of the day, that was a welcome idea to help the lower ranked players participate and still compete.
I think absolutely it is. I think, and increasingly you'll see, you know, athletes' rights put more and more forwards, you know, in any sport, because more transparent age, a more democratic age, we hope, in most instances. And that was actually coming back to anti-doping. That was a big battle, was the kind of who represents the athlete voice. We had an athlete committee at WADA. There were other athlete committees with the IOC and taking different views on how strong to be with a country like Russia with the issues. And yeah, it comes back to, you know, who the athletes have to have a voice, because if you have a system with the rules in place that the athletes don't buy into and don't believe in and they question, then it doesn't have the, you know, it doesn't have the trust and the credibility to be upheld in the same way. So I think always representing kind of the athlete's voice is best. You know, athletes will disagree on things internally, but trying to gain consensus on whether it's anti-doping, whether it's, you know, actually having an athlete voice at the table of the IOCs and the federations, you know, whether it's on illegal betting, which became more of an issue, or integrity issues in sport, you know, making sure athletes feel they have a representation there as to how these issues are managed, and it's not suits doing it for them, I think is really important in Olympic sport, because there has been distrust there between the kind of, you know, this notion of ivory tower Olympic federations and the common athlete, so to speak. So I think that's important. You have that bridge taken care of.
It seems like a shared thought between civilians and politicians.
Yeah.
Sports and the sports authorities, ivory towers, disingenuous with regard to what's actually going on.
And I think just on that, actually, yeah, I think, and it was certainly, you know, I'm going back to I have no kind of no view on how it is now, really, but when I was at WADA, there's definitely that perception of this this gulf between the athletes and the anti-doping bodies, and this sort of tug of war, I suppose, you know, who speaks for the athletes. And that played out over the whole Russian issue, as we saw with the IOC and WADA and different federations. But I think it's more prevalent in Olympic sport than it is in what I call private sport, in the sort of the Premier Leagues and the major leagues and the Formula Ones, because there is this notion of quite an old school Lausanne hotel corridor, you know, sporting world in the Olympic movement, and that being very distanced from athletes. So I think it's Olympic sport has a way to go to catch up with the sort of private sporting world in making sure athletes have a voice.
I've never had somebody come on to talk about the business of the Olympics, but it would be interesting to think about in the history of Olympia, how and when it became a business concept more than an amateur sports concept. Let's park that, because I have lots of other things I want to talk to you about. I want to focus in on your communications background, and let's start with how, over your experience, you've seen through the transformation of all methods of communication being digital. How do you manage to keep a communication strategy that's authentic, compelling, effective, especially during a crisis?
Good question. becomes increasingly hard with time because of the volume of channels and outlets there are for people to speak and speak openly and to sort of manage the message, I suppose, is what you say in the industry. Look, I'm 41 years old. I'm still of a generation where you kind of look at the traditional media as the main source to push out a big message to. That said, they now obviously have their arms of what was Twitter and now X and TikTok and all these other avenues where they push their messages. So you need to be conscious that some things you're pushing out proactive message, positive messages, I should say. Of course, you want them to appear on their platforms, online, it's on their websites or in the paper, as we say. But actually, you've got to imagine some won't, and some might only make the grade of a small story on their social media. So there's a lack of. You can have the best relationships you want with journalists and the best media relations strategy, but there's a huge amount uncontrollable in terms of, the journalists I'll be working with still have an editor to report to. There's still, in the mainstream media, I'm talking a real sense of clickbait mentality. Is there Padel, let's take Padel. So, I might have a great story on, working with Playtomic and some stats which are fascinating around the growth of Padel in the UK or US or wherever it might be. But do we have a celebrity name to put to, a celebrity name to put to that kind of
Flipping Eva Longoria.
Oh, Eva Longoria, I know, absolutely. Well, that would be fantastic. But yeah, the number of times I see a David Beckham stock image photo used, and that becomes a Padel story with some pretty fluffy content in there. And I think, well, there's some really interesting stuff in there, which could tell a much better story. But unless you have a celebrity speaking to it or captured in an event doing something, it doesn't make the cut with these editors. So I think that hopefully answers one side of your story, in that it is increasingly hard to push these stories into mainstream media. I'm also doing it with a sport called Padel, which is a niche sport, and we all hope and think there's a good destination, but we're on that journey and the early stage of the journey. So it's still very small. And in a country like England, you've got unless it's football, you've got to really argue the case of how it's going to get in the sports pages or on the news. So so you're on an uphill battle with getting Padel into the mainstream media, I suppose. So that's one side. But look, I think the good thing is I'm working with early stage businesses who want advice on strategies on how to get their message out. And it's not just via the media. I see public relations as, it's influencing the public. It's trying to leave an impression on the public or different audiences. And that can be via media. It can be going straight to the communities themselves. So a lot of what I do is, can we come up with ideas to reach the business community? And that can be getting corporates playing Padel. Can we reach school kids or young people? How can we engage university students? The women's side of the sport, that's a big, I think it's 42% or so people say that of women play Padel. So how can we engage the women's community? So it's a lot of public relations, I'd say, is not just about, as nice as it is, getting independent media coverage and as good as the credibility that can provide. It's actually, how can we get straight to these audiences through other ways, be they campaigns? And that's more within our hands. That's coming up with good, clever ideas. That's finding ways to resonate with these target audiences. And that's playing on Padel's trendy, unique kind of appeal and getting, I think once people get on the court for the first time, they get very hooked. So there's many ways to promote and to be successful with strategies and helping businesses achieve their objectives. But media is, it's increasingly hard because of the reasons I mentioned.
All right, well, let's just lean into this notion of objectives. I worked obviously in a large organization before, L'Oreal, and we did a lot of communications and we had a few things to sell and so on.
Yeah.
And I remember objectives being very much counted. We had this equivalency of dollars for advertising through our advertorial or our PR approaches. Today, where are we on that? I mean, do we have agencies now sort of evaluating one view of a TikTok image, a TikTok video of 10 seconds that's worth a value? How are people setting objectives and measuring success in PR and communications?
Yeah. Well, yeah, absolutely. The way I learned was on kind of AVE, or the media value of earned coverage. That is, as far as I know, and from our side, is still one way we work. Social media impressions and impact and increases of follows from a post or from a campaign is obviously another metric. Um, but I try to, with what we do, try to look at it more holistically. I try to think, okay, well, if we're working with a club, how can we look at, yes, those things I just mentioned from a kind of media metrics point of view, but actually, what does that lead to in terms of court utilization? We're talking slightly longer term, but what's it lead
Right.
to? People coming through the door, or membership rates or expenditure at clubs, all these things. So I think and that's a work in progress, but we have to look at kind of, what was the line in the sand before we came on board to do a job for a club. And then, 6, 9 months down the line, what is it then? And how can that be attributed to the work we did to grow the profile of? So I think there's many ways you can look at it. And that is the challenge, of my industry, as you know, is I can't preach about it enough. I think the storytelling side is great, and people, when they see a campaign or a great article or a great piece in the media, they get very into it. But actually, it's always how traceable is it, the work we do and the stories we tell that lead to a sale or a new member or a tangible outcome. And that's, I think, the challenge that PR always has, which maybe from a marketing point of view is always easier to quantify because it's more sales and stats driven. So no easy answer to the question, but we try and look at it from different angles. And when we're working with clients, it's all it is coming up with the stories and the things that resonate with people and make paddle appealing to people outside the bubble. And that's a big part of what we do, is we're saying, well, look, we know the sport well. We know what's going to make it tick in the business press or the health and fitness press, or through influencers on social media channels, or through the sport business press if it's a commercial agreement that we're announcing. So I think I'm constantly trying to look at how does paddle relate to non-paddle people, and that's again coming back to those things about setting up a challenge. Absolutely, setting up a challenge to run a PR agency in paddle at this stage of its journey, very, very hard the first couple of years. It gets more rewarding as paddle grows, as hopefully the job we do gets better, and as the bubble of potential paddle sort of listeners gets bigger. So our market is growing with us, and hopefully our job gets easier over time because we're speaking to a more receptive audience.
In listening to you, Ben, I was thinking the notion we would talk about is attribution,
Mm,
where we have this view that's turned into a customer and then a lifetime value.
yeah.
And you would have thought that with digital means, the ability to track the attribution through cookies would have been simple and joyful.
Mm,
Yet, we've had GDPR step in to sort of break the links, if you will. And then secondly, the more you can measure it like that, the more there's gaming of it. And sort of I mean, you think of influencers who say, "Oh, I really love this brand. It's called this thing," because I got paid $1,000 to talk about it or
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and the authenticity of the messaging, as soon as it's so crafted, it smells like BS.
Yeah.
And then you have, as you mentioned, so many channels to deal with.
Yeah.
How do you keep the multiplicity of people who managing those channels speaking the same voice, keeping the same type of brand out there? It becomes very tricky if you're not smart about it.
Yeah. Challenging, really challenging. Yeah, how do you break through and ensure things are authentic when there's so much noise, so many channels, everyone's an author, everyone has a voice, which is a good thing in many ways, but it also means there's a plethora of stuff which is you don't need to listen to perhaps, and it used to be obviously we had our TV station, our newspaper of choice, and maybe our radio station. Things were quite simple. Things have moved on in many ways for the good, but it also means it's hard to control that message for sure, and hard to know what to listen to and where to find it. It's the fragmentation of society and of the media world as well. God, how do I answer that? It's challenging. It really is. I think the best impact we can have it comes back down to trying to be really focused on what we do for a client. And again, if I take a paddle club in the States we work with, if it's one, and working with a company called Conquer Paddle, who are going to be opening in Arizona and in Phoenix area. Without going into our strategy with them, it's going to be absolutely how can we, their first site, how can we, as much as we want to give them credibility across the US and internationally, and that's all important stuff, how can we get people through the doors of their club? And doing that through an influencer who actually lives in the area, who might come and influence local people because they are known through word of mouth. That's going to have great impact. Rather than plucking someone from who's not from that area that might look
From
good.
LA.
Yeah, it absolutely might look great online. Or what a great coup to find this major league star from X or Y city that has no kind of geographical relevance to their first club. So that, for instance, it's about being not going for the big prize of what might look great, and actually ultimately is it going to help them deliver some more some revenue, some members, some players. So I think it's coming down to simple ideas like that, and it's also going back old school to kind of in-person events and so forth. I think people absolutely crave that post COVID. So if we can organize good events where we bring along journalists, we bring along some pro players for an exhibition, we bring along some local community people, and people just get that experience in person. Again, I think that kind of work generates memberships, it generates players coming, it generates a community. So I think for clubs and places that rely on local custom, that it comes down to kind of doing some quite simple things really well. And yeah, that's kind of how I would tackle it.
So two other areas within PR that's interesting to me. One is the personal brand of the boss. So let's say you're a major client, but the CEO of this organization, and you might be the PR spokesperson,
Yeah.
or you might be the PR agency helping them craft their PR.
Mm.
To what extent and how have you approached dealing with the personal brand of the CEO as part of the mix?
I have done that a lot during my anti-doping days. I did it. I worked for the Commonwealth Games Federation after WADA as well, and again, and talk about another challenging, topic of quite an anachronistic in many eyes sporting movement, which many think is on its kind of last legs, and I hope it's not. I think the Commonwealth has a lot of good, but it's a difficult sell these days as a sports event. So
Let's say it's easy for us to speak about it in Britain.
correct, yeah, it
I
depends
mean, it's
whose
we
eyes.
typically are happy with it. It's maybe the others who aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. So it depends who's whose eyes you're looking through. But yeah, I think I was working with the CEOs, and I suppose the best example I probably would give is WADA, and I was working with a director general and a figurehead chair. Figurehead chair being Craig Reedy, who was former British Olympic Association big figure in the UK, but he was he was the chair, and then David Howman is a Kiwi, was the hands-on CEO based in Montreal. And you're constantly, I think it's no surprise you're constantly working through that challenge of who's going to speak on certain issues. Is it the chair, or is it the president, or is it the CEO? Different individuals will have different views on the topics that come out as well. So you are how I wish there was a kind of a science to it, but actually it's about, and I hope this answers your question, it's about being quite pragmatic and, collecting the views of the individual you're representing or doing a statement for. It's checking it's in line with the company's regulations and all of the kind of that boring stuff. And it's putting something across in a way that's going to resonate with your audience. So for me, it was the media in a way that's not too dry, that might get used and reprinted, and help tell the story and give WADA, some exposure that we're an organization that needs to be heard in the issue. So I think it's it's advising them as well. So, obviously, a lot of people be aware it's actually coming up with a statement, proposing something for sign off that we think sounds in their language, and getting to be their voice and getting to know them innately to be able to, speak on their behalf. So I think there's different ways of doing it, and some characters are more strong than others in terms of wanting their exact language, and actually you getting to know and being that second voice for them. So I think it's a challenging one, and you only get experience through hours on the job and knowing the people you're representing. And I've always been even when you're dealing with anti-doping and you're working within these really tight parameters of kind of what do the rules say? What's the legal arguments, and who are our stakeholders, and how should we, be communicating to them, and all these different audiences. I've always taken the view that actually you still want to get as much personality across in an answer if you can as possible, because there's so much out there that people just skim their eyes over. You want something that stands out. And I think if you can be a half decent orator or a or writer or be good with words, I think people still value that and notice that in a kind of very vanilla world in many ways that we live.
Yeah, bring some color.
Bring some
Um, One of the challenges that you presumably face with regard to PR of paddle players in particular,
Mm,
obviously, one is that they don't all speak English,
yeah.
more than some large number anyway, are Hispanophone only, with the occasional Brazilian. And the challenge when you're representing them, a little bit like the CEO I was just talking about now, is that they are the media.
Yeah.
And the I used to send business people to Austin, Texas for South by Southwest, not to go listen to the digital transformation 1/3 of the conference, South by Southwest, but to go and actually look at how musicians
Mhm.
manage their profile. So for CEOs to think about musicians' personalities and having that run through the way they communicate,
Yeah.
and then or the storytelling that goes on at the film side of South by Southwest.
Yeah.
So how do you do storytelling? And anyway, so this is sort of my viewpoint or my philosophy with regard to personal branding. And for the players, how are you finding it to I mean, I'm thinking between women and men, between Spanish and Argentinian. I don't know how you want to break it up, but
Yeah.
how are you finding their ability to promote themselves, to get out there? Presumably, there's some who are just like a duck in water, and then others like oil in water.
Yeah. So look, in honesty, I'm not working with that many players at the moment because I found, which is no fault of the player circuit, to be honest. They are at a situation where they are looking for sponsorship, such as the infancy of the sport, especially in the emerging markets. And of course, my argument would be right to secure more sponsorship and better commercial ideas. You need a better profile and PR. But we're at that stage where we're not talking about F1 drivers where they have big PR budgets, etc.
Yeah.
So that's, the bulk of my work is with businesses or companies. However, I have worked with some players. I've worked with some GB players. I've worked with some American players. And I think out there, yes, there's the language challenge from the Spanish, speaking players for sure. But I see that as an opportunity. If I was if I had 10 seconds to speak to the top Spanish players now, I'd say, hire me.
Move to Miami.
Move to Miami, absolutely. Which one has, by the way. But yes,
Arturo Coelho.
correct. But I would say hire me because I want to grow your profile. I think there's a great opportunity for you at this stage in your career to become a bit of a profile, a figure in the non-Hispanic markets and grow your brand. It sounds cheesy, but grow your brand and actually make a name for yourself. I think people want to know who these players are, but they're not recognizable yet. So that would be the message I send to some of the top players who are Spanish speakers. I think what I see at the moment is there's a few standout performers. There's a Britt Dubins in the US who is great and is doing some great work on social media, is great sense of humor and really showing her
Indeed.
personality as well as doing a great job on the court. And I think that's smart of Britt. I think she absolutely, having spoken to her, she knows the big play of needing to get sponsors and needing to show who she is as a person as well as a great performer. Then you've got someone like Denise Hofer
Hoffer.
in Germany. Likewise, she's
Both of whom have been on the Joy of Paddle.
there we go. And look, doing a great job because she's showing herself as a personality, who she is as a person. I can see she's working with, nice resorts with paddle courts. So yeah, she's doing all the right things to get noticed by, commercially and by the companies that are percolating in the sport. And yeah, I think so. So my point being, when I see the players doing that, I think they see the bigger picture of yes, I can do everything on court and I'm not going to distract from that, but actually I can put some time and effort to getting noticed amongst, the bulk of players who will just be head down, not really worried about their media profile or how their personalities are seen away from the court, but perhaps forgetting the great opportunity here in a pretty unique time with this sport in that in countries where we're living. We see it as a new sport, and there's going to be interest increasingly as there's, as it works towards the Olympics, which I'm sure it will. And the personalities that, yes, are at the top of their game in the rankings, but also have sort of shown themselves on different channels and have a bit more noticed. That's when, the opportunities will come to these guys, because they are doing something a bit out of the norm. They are, yeah, they're showing personality, they're showing color, as you said. So I would like to see more of that from players. I'd like to see some more, characters emerge. It's across all sport that there's, it's increasingly sanitized and media trained with all these guys and girls. And I think it's a shame when we want to see more personalities come out.
Mm,
I can see why also in the traditional sports they're afraid to, afraid to reveal their personalities because of things getting taken out of context and, going over
mm,
social media and so forth. And we live in an age when, offense is taken. So I think I would say show your personality, think laterally, use your own social channels and become your own author until the opportunity comes when mainstream media are coming to you for opportunities to tell your story. So, keep knocking at those doors for the likes of Britt and Denise, and the opportunities will happen. They will. So yeah, hats off to the few doing it well.
beautiful. Yeah, and I think one of the things that's important within that is to know what is your ethical or your backbone line within all that, and also to know your boundaries so that
Yeah.
you keep yourself safe, because it's easy to get sucked into that world and think, oh, this one only got 40,000 likes.
Yeah,
Because
it is,
my
but
last one got 100,000, much better.
yeah, you can become slightly obsessive over it. But I think, again, the likes of Britt and Denise, well, I can't speak for both of them, but I know, Britt's had, support from a social media expert. You can see that it's really brilliantly produced, and just having someone on their team to help that is going to help, just market them in the right way. And yeah, I think they're thinking bigger than on court.
All right, I have two last questions for you, Ben. The first one is, you've talked about being involved with purpose-driven businesses or
Mm.
purpose-driven leadership. And I was wondering, how do you define that, and how has that influenced the way, the projects, the organizations with whom you work?
Yeah, I suppose that again that started with WADA, as so much did, and then that gives you absolutely, that's one thing you take away from WADA is that we got a lot of criticism for various reasons for a while, but I think actually you there's a clear compass of where you're trying to head as an organization, and everyone buys into that internally, and that gives you this sense of working towards something, this sort of crusade, I suppose. Similarly with the Commonwealth Games, I thought when I was there, I still believe in Commonwealth sport and think it's a great competition, and think a lot of the top athletes in the world are from Commonwealth countries. I bought into this idea of Commonwealth sport and what it could do, and this notion of the Commonwealth, which I think you have to working there as well, of it actually today being a force for good in many ways. So again, that kind of reinforced that. And I think paddle in a very different way. Yeah, sort of I'm as many are in the early stages of the sport on a bit of a mission to grow its profile, to help more people notice what it is, and to see why it's attractive and appealing and exciting, and yeah, I think in paddle I feel we have to make sure we're not drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say in America, but part of in a pretty unique situation in our lives and careers where we've all grown up with sports and inherited their baggage as sports and as working industries, the good and the bad of what they've done well. But paddle, if we're from outside the Hispanic world, we see it, very much as a new sport, and we're able to help shape how it's viewed and hopefully help shape the type of people playing it by the way we present it to media or to different audiences. And I feel quite kind of privileged to be at that early stage of helping do that in my own small way. And that's what kind of guides me when I wake up on a Monday morning is this idea of, yeah, in 10 years it will be different. We'll be at a different evolution. So yeah, being a kind of early adopter and as part of this, again, kind of quote unquote, gold rush moment, it feels quite exciting. I've not had it before in my career, and won't have it again. So it's unique and it's fun.
Well, I want you to describe at the end your paddle 22, but
Mm.
how would you describe the purpose of building paddle?
The purpose of building paddle is to present this fairly quirky maverick type sport that is, I think, appealing to a much greater pool of people than any other racket sport I know. I grew up playing squash and tennis, and both quite difficult to learn and to master. And I think paddle is, and certainly not Mickey Mouse by any stretch of the imagination, but it's much easier to pick up. And I think that instantly, if you pick something up quickly, there's enjoyment there. And if there's enjoyment there, you come back and you come back again. And there's the sticky the sticky kind of argument we talk about with paddle. So I think it
Yeah,
is.
I should know something about 51 years of stuck to my paddle racket.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect example. So yes, I think it's about it's bringing the horse to water. If we can get more people, yeah, I'm focused on obviously the sort of the business and the industry side rather than the playing side, but actually ultimately, why is everyone involved in the business side of paddle? It's because there's a great opportunity when people play it of massive enjoyment and massive kind of social buzz. So if we can get more people to a paddle court, and from our side, that's getting businesses successful. That's getting, that's a job well done. If I can get more people aware of paddle, and excited around it and talking around it, that's sort of a barometer of success as far as I'm concerned. So, at the very high level, that's what we're trying to do. And yeah, trying to, without it sounding all too lofty, trying to grow an industry and again, play my own small part in doing that. And hopefully we're doing a half decent job with it.
And sharing the joy, as we say, Ben.
Yes.
So tell us, when I look at your profile, Ben, I see a number of things within paddle that you're doing. Paddle 22 seems to be the sort of the peak of the top part of it. But what exactly is paddle 22? And because you have seals like a number of bows within your archery kit that
Yes.
paddle 22 is doing. So give us an understanding of what paddle 22 is all about.
Yeah, so Paddle 22 is the day job. It is what pays my bills, and it's kind of my team I built is Paddle 22. So that's what I set up almost 3 years ago, a PR and marketing communications business, if you like, for the sport. And we work with clubs. Primarily, I'd say it's been clubs so far. Work with conferences, the likes of Racket X or Paddle World Summit. We've worked with racket brands. So Wallick Rackets are a company I've worked with, which are a great brand. And worked with the pro side. So Hexagon Cup, worked with for a good period of time, did some work with the PPL in the US. And then work kind of, much more with individuals as well, kind of potential investors or people seeking investment or seeking sponsorship. So helping on the strategic side for individuals and businesses who want to get into the sport, want to put money in or want to be invested in to help grow. So that's the kind of the different sectors and players, as I mentioned as well, and that's kind of on their personal profiles. So that's kind of within the sport. And then I've got a membership community I recently set up called Insider 22, which I'm delighted you're part of, Minter. And
Thank you, sir.
it's great fun, and it's yeah, an opportunity. I met Mayan Gordon, who's an absolute firecracker and an absolute genius at what she does in growing communities and creating a buzz online with creating insights and masterclasses and networking, online networking, and yeah, it's essentially an online membership community for people in the paddle industry who want to meet like-minded individuals, again, who might be seeking investment, who might be looking for sponsorship, who might just want to find a business partner or might just want to learn. And that's part of Paddle 22 and is an online membership community that Mayan's really driven with me. And then the other businesses, as you mentioned, I think, again, choosing the timing of things isn't always possible. But working in one particular sport, I've opportunities, and this is what I wake up with every day, is thinking of a new idea, and I have to be disciplined and keep myself in check. But last year, in the space of about 4 or 5 months, some other opportunities came up, and in no particular order, one was property and paddle, which I set up thanks to Rohit Grul, who's a fantastic chartered surveyor in London and a paddle kind of passionate paddle aficionado. And that's essentially a networking and membership community for the real estate sector and paddle. And we've had a series of events in the UK and US. I've also had Club Águilas, which I'm running with Joe Middleton, who is a former CEO of Canterbury Rugby Clothing and Levi Strauss and a great kind of fashion background. and we've created there, hopefully the start of something really exciting, which is a bit of a Michelin guide of the top resorts and paddle clubs globally.
Nice.
And the aim with that, again, we're early stage. That's a pre-revenue project, but the aim is to really build that into the dream is to create a sort of Mr. and Mrs. Smith guide for high net worths wanting to travel and enjoy paddle worldwide. So that's the ambition with that. And then yeah, what can I also tell you about Anglo-American Cup, which is
Sure.
yeah, which is going to be first year in October in Rocket Paddle in their new WoW location in Beckton. And
Hoping to be a part of that myself.
yes, we need to chat, but yeah, it's as the name sounds, it is. If you look at how the America's Cup and the Ryder and Davis Cup all started, it was all GB US, and I thought there was something slightly kind of turning that on its head we could do with Britain and America being the new kids on the block with paddle and recreate that Anglo-American sporting competition. So yeah, we've got lined up the best Brits and best Americans we can in London in October. Open category, the top four players from a LTA level and the top national players we can get at the sort of at that level, and then we've got the 40s, 50s, and 60s category going into the seniors, men's and women's. So look, 64 players. We will try and make this as fun and as kind of story driven as possible. We want to really play on this Anglo-American idea where we have American corporates in London that week playing British corporates and really play on kind of the culture between the two countries and make this into a sort of a story on and off the court. So yeah, and that will go to US next year. So who knows where that goes? We've got LTA and USPA backing, which is a great start, and a lot of excitement and support for it. So all early stage projects.
That's brilliant. So I will circle back with you afterwards, put all
Yes.
those show notes, links, so people can track you down, Ben, if they want to hire you. Also figure out how to maybe join the Insider 22, look at what you're doing at Paddle 22 and Yonder. Ben, been great. Any other links, any other actions, quick call to action you would like to pass along before we close off?
No, look, I think that's that's enough for people to digest with those businesses at the end. But they're all exciting exciting futures, I hope, and I think we're at a really sort of momentous time with this sport, and everyone I meet is unsolicited talking about paddle, so that's a good sign.
Enjoy the ride, Ben. Thank you very much for coming on, and vamos.
Thank you, Minter. Thank you.